Well, we're finally at the end of our series of the After God's Heart, the life of David. I appreciate every one of you who have watched the videos. Hopefully you've been encouraged and learn a few more things about the life of David. It is one of the, a lot of times we would say, one of the key figures in God's plan, and spans over, if you remember all the way back to the first lesson, it spans over several chapters. So I encourage you. I know there's a lot of things we didn't even discuss, but it would be a good opportunity to just go read the whole life of David. But in this final lesson, I want us to think about really the Psalms. You know, we mentioned in the beginning we're going to try to sprinkle in a few of the Psalms and stuff like that. But as most scholars tell us, he wrote 73 of the 150 Psalms, almost half of the book. Here's just a glimpse of what we believe David wrote. And you can go online and find different, different studies that have been put together, um, sort of like this, that kind of gives you a glimpse of what's going on in David's life here on the left, and then the psalm that correlates to that. Of course, these are, scholars that are trying to put these things together. So, you don't necessarily have to hold 100% and say this is exactly right every single time. Scholars have different opinions about some of these things, but I want us to just kind of take a moment just to look at Psalm 37. It's going to give us what is called the last psalm, possibly, of what they think that David wrote, and it kind of correlates with David's last words. And in fact, I tell you what, let's actually go to 2 Samuel chapter 23, because we see something kind of interesting there, where it'll say, actually, in 2 Samuel 23, it'll say, David's last words, and you can kind of read there if you want, just how the Spirit spoke to me and his word with my tongue. The God of Israel said, the God, or the rock of Israel, spoke to me. He who rules over man must be just, ruling of the fear of God. And he goes on and talks about in verse 5 where he says, although my house is not so with God, yet he has made me an everlasting covenant. He says a few words there, and then actually it's not as if he just dies at this moment. Actually, you keep reading there in the last two chapters of 2 Samuel, it talks about one last thing that, excuse me, that God wants David to do for the sins and the census that he takes, and you can kind of read that story. But let's take a focus. Primarily what we want to focus on is the Psalm 37 that's believed to be his last psalm written. And the reason I want you to focus on that, go ahead and turn over there. And it is a little bit lengthy. It's 40 verses. And you can feel free to stop the video and pause it and read that. I'm just going to point out a few verses and then make some comments at the end. Listen to a couple of these verses. Verse 1, do not fret because of evildoers, nor be envious of the workers of iniquity, for they shall soon be cut down like the grass and wither as the grass herb. That's going to kind of be the theme of really this whole psalm that David writes about. Even the subtitle may be there on your paper where it says the heritage of the righteous and the calamity of the wicked. Meaning at the end of the day, God's judgment rules. No matter what's going on in life, no matter how much you think evil is winning, at the end of the day, evil is going to be cut down like the grass and wither. And the righteous shall prevail. And that's really the message of this whole psalm as you read it. Look at verse 11. The meek shall inherit the earth, and they shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace. I thought that was interesting that correlates directly to one of Jesus's beatitudes in the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. Look at verse 12. The wicked plots against the just and gnashes him with his teeth. The Lord laughs at him, for he sees his day is coming. Verse 18. The Lord knows the days of the upright, and their inheritance shall be forever. Look at verse 25. And I have been young, and now am old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his descendants begging bread. He is ever merciful and lends, and his descendants are blessed. Depart from evil and do good and dwell forevermore. The last section, go to verse 34, when it says, wait on the Lord and keep his way, and he shall exalt you to inherit the land. When the wicked are cut off, you shall see it. I have seen the wicked in great power, and spreading himself like the native green tree, and yet he passes away, and behold, he was there no more. Verse 38, the transgressors shall be destroyed together, and the future of the wicked shall be cut off, but salvation of the righteous is from the Lord, and he is their strength in the time of trouble. And the Lord shall help him and deliver them. He shall deliver them from the wicked and be saved, because they trusted in him. Like I said, this message over and over again. And what's interesting, you got to remember, as David says, I'm young, but now I'm old. It's this idea that he has seen his whole life. He gets to look back at his whole life and realize God was there. God was always there. I just had to make sure to put my trust in him. No matter the good times, no matter the bad times, no matter the struggles, no matter what the wicked seem to be getting away with, at the end of the day, the righteous will be saved, and the evil will be destroyed. And I think that's such a vital message for us to realize, that David even realizes from his old age of what he's passing along. Now, speaking of passing along, go ahead and go over to 2 Kings chapter 2. And 2 Kings chapter 2 is actually where it talks about specifically the death of David. And in chapter 2, at the very beginning, where he says, now the days of David drew near that he should die. And he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and prove yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, and walk in his ways, and his statutes, and his commandments, and his judgments, and his testimonies, and all that's written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and whatever you turn. But as you keep reading on there through verse 9, he gives his final instructions to Solomon. Not only about how he is to live his life, but how to handle a few things as David's going to pass away. And then finally in verse 10, and David rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. The period that David reigned over Israel was 40 years. 7 years he reigned in Hebron, and in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years. And then Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and the kingdom was firmly established. This beautiful, beautiful life of David. But I want you to realize that he did not leave without final instructions. And that just simply makes us realize how important it is that if we have information for people to know, if we have things to say, we need to say them. Don't hold back, especially when it comes to the gospel of Jesus. Don't hold back the instructions that you know God wants us to follow. And David gives this advice to his son Solomon, who he knows the pressure he's about to go under. He knows what he's about to have to deal with as the king. And he gives him those instructions. And I wonder how valuable the instructions we can give to other people about how to handle life, about how to realize that calamity comes, and it seems like the wicked a lot of times get away with things, but at the end of the day, the righteous will inherit. The righteous will prevail. And I'd say as well realize that David was part of a bigger picture. You know, he was a part of the picture. But it wasn't just about David. It was about what comes after David and the covenant that was made with God and David. And you see that as you go all the way to Matthew chapter 1 and verse 17. You know, Matthew chapter 1 has the genealogy of Jesus. And you can go up there and look a little bit earlier where it talks about David and Solomon and so on and so on. But verse 17, it says, thus there were 14 generations in all, from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile of Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. Which means David was only one link. But he was an important link. And without David, the link would have been broken. Much like all the others here, the 14 generations and the 14 generations and the 14 generations. David had a part in God's ultimate plan. And the reason he was able to fulfill that is because he was a man after God's own heart. So I finished this series by asking you and helping you, think about the fact that you can be a part of God's story as well. If you're willing to be a man and woman after God's own heart. You can only be a part of God's plan if you're willing to be righteous, if you're willing to be blameless, if you're willing to listen, if you're willing to follow instructions. That's what David did. As you look at your life and you look at all the things we learned about David, is that who you are? Is that the character that you have? Is that who you're trying to be? A man and a woman after God's own heart.